Quality, comfort, and grip at an affordable price. Whether it's our standard, pro, or elite socks, there's an option for everyone. Try a pair for yourself now at puregripsocks.com.
I'll be honest with you, I really wanted to hate these. Where I guess I should also say that I'd be lying if I didn't say that I still really dislike the direction that Nike is currently taking the Tiempo series into, but what they've done with this particular pair has exceeded my expectations. Where even when you open up this Jordan retro style box, you'll notice it's pretty fancy, chrome red on the inside. Pull the paper up, and what you'll reveal is the return of the Nike lunchbox. And I'm not kidding, this is legitimately what looks like a lunchbox, or at least what we used to call them when we were kids, back when this was a thing in the 2010s. Where even though it looks like premium leather, it's not. It's a black synthetic material with the embossed Nike swoosh there on the backside, and you can see on this handle, you have this really pretty looking Nike Tiempo branding. The zipper is in chrome. Pull it open, and it of course reveals the boots on the inside. Ladies and gentlemen, say hello to the special edition Nike Tiempo Legend 10 Elite Luxe, a very unique made in Montebelluna, Italy variant of the current Tiempo Legend that got a lot of people excited because, as you can see, they would appear to be made out of natural leather, unlike the regular inline Legend 10. However, like a lot of things these days, unfortunately, looks can be deceiving because despite the very convincing leather grain finish to the upper and old school Tiempo stitching, this Italian-made Tiempo is still made from the same FlyTouch Plus synthetic material as the inline Tiempo Legend 10, despite them retailing for an extra $25, bringing the grand total to $265 for what is still not a kangaroo leather Tiempo. Where you can't tell me that Nike didn't know what they were doing here. They know there's been some huge backlash for making the current Tiempo a full synthetic upper, so to make the boot intentionally look more like actual leather when in fact it's not, they know for a fact that the average consumer isn't going to know any better, and they're going to sell a ton of units simply based on the assumption that these are actually leather because they look like they're actually leather. Where, don't get me wrong, they're not hiding the fact that these are synthetic, but unless you read the fine print, you probably wouldn't know that until you get the boots in hand. Having said that, even though these are synthetic, and that's not something that I really ever want to hear about a $265 Nike Tiempo Legend, I will say that I think that this version is a lot nicer than the regular one, which is exactly what we're going to discuss in today's review. The good, the bad, and ultimately whether or not this redesign of the current synthetic Tiempo actually makes the synthetic Tiempo concept make sense. So if you're interested in learning more, including how they fit and feel on feet, please stick around, watch the entire review. And if you are interested in one of the 5,000 pairs that Nike produced, there are still some available. Get them before they're gone via the first link down below. And as always, if you guys appreciate the unsponsored, unsugar-coated, brutally honest opinions on this channel, don't forget to drop a like on the video and make sure you're subscribed if you haven't already so you don't miss out on my reviews of all the latest football boots of 2025. So first things first, here's a side-by-side of the regular Tiempo Legend 10 Elite next to the special edition made in Italy variant, where it's pretty clear to see that one looks significantly more modern than the other, and one also looks like it's made of actual leather versus what is very clearly a synthetic material. However, they are both made from the same FlyTouch Plus synthetic. Where I think the super positive response of the visuals of this football boot should be a pretty big eye-opener for Nike, in the sense that they've been really trying to modernize the visuals of the Nike Tiempo. They certainly did so with the Legend 10, but there's very clearly still very much a demand for that kind of more old school aesthetic. And not to say that these look super old school. If you put them next to a pair of Copa Mundials, they still look super modern, obviously, but I still think there's a certain charm to having stitching within the leather upper, and certainly just a leather Tiempo is something that very clearly there's still a lot of demand for. And I'm getting completely sidetracked here, but when I first saw these, I immediately thought of this particular boot, the 2009 Nike Tiempo Legend 3 Elite that I happen to have in a very similar colorway. You can see that the stitching pattern isn't too far off what you have on that new release. And this also is a synthetic Tiempo. It was the first and only time they actually made a full synthetic Tiempo up until the Legend 10, and it wasn't a particularly well-received football boot. Full Kangalite synthetic for the entire upper, with the Elite model also sporting a carbon fiber sole plate. They felt okay and they're relatively comfortable, but certainly from a feel, comfort, and touch perspective, compared to the normal kangaroo leather version, this was miles behind. Which in a lot of ways is what perfectly describes where the Tiempo series is right now, given its new full synthetic direction, where obviously if you're just a fan of natural leather football boots, certainly the softest kangaroo leather out there is no comparison. This doesn't even come close. However, it does still feel pretty good if you're looking for a leather-like sensation while still maintaining the benefits of a synthetic material, in the sense that it's not going to stretch quite as much, it's not going to absorb as much water, and generally from a maintenance perspective, it's just going to be easier to take care of and potentially more durable. However, when they're making them as thin as they are these days, it kind of almost defeats the purpose of even buying a football boot that's supposed to feel like leather if you're just ending up with a barefoot touch on the ball like everything else anyways. And for the sake of time, we're not going to go into great detail on the California kangaroo leather ban that has affected the Nike Tiempo, as well as just a lot of football boot brands for that matter, in terms of no longer producing kangaroo leather uppers. But in the case of Nike completely wiping natural leather from their football boot department entirely, I just don't see how that makes sense in the grand scheme of what the brand still produces, where if you look at the Jordan Retros and really just their sneakers in general, so many of them are still made from natural leathers. So if they can do it there, why are they not still giving us natural leather football boots? Nike, if you're watching, and I'm sure plenty of people share this opinion, I don't expect the Tiempo Legend 11, if we want to call it that, to be kangaroo leather, but I see no reason why it can't be a premium natural leather of some kind. If Adidas can do it and other brands can do it, I don't see why you can't as well. Where in the case of this particular variation of FlyTouch Plus, you can see that it still has that artificial leather grain finish on the surface, and listed in the tech specs is also ACC all conditions control technology, even though you will not find ACC listed anywhere on the upper. Also on their website in the tech specs, they talk about the grippy dot texturing that you have on the upper of the normal Legend 10 that is nowhere to be found on this made in Italy variation. So I'm not sure that those tech specs are necessarily 100% accurate, even though it's on Nike's own website. But as far as this material is concerned, I'm not sure if it's from a completely different batch, given that these are being made in Montebelluna, Italy, unlike the normal Tiempo Legend 10 Elites, but this material does end up feeling just that little bit softer, and because of the stitching that they've incorporated here, you just end up with a little bit more plushness in between the stitched areas. That does make it certainly visually more convincing as actual leather, but from a feel perspective, it just ends up being a little bit softer against your foot and not quite as thin as the normal Tiempo Legend 10. It's not significantly more padded, don't get me wrong, but it does feel at least that little bit softer. Having said that, both when it comes to feel against your foot as well as touch on the ball, it's still very clear that this is a synthetic upper. It just doesn't have that same subtle elasticity and plushness and softness that premium natural leather has. Instead, it's a little bit more structured. From a touch on the ball perspective, while it's soft, it's very thin and just has a little bit of numbness that when comparing synthetic to leather, it's just one of those things that no brand has ever been able to get right. And perhaps that's one of the reasons why so many brands have never strayed away from natural leather. It just has a certain feel that cannot be replicated. Certainly in terms of a performance benefit standpoint, if you want to say that synthetics are better than leather, this does have a little bit more of a grippy finish on the surface. And of course, it's never going to dry out. It's not going to overstretch. It's not going to have any of the potential issues that do come along with a natural leather material. But in saying that, natural leathers have also come a long way, just like synthetics, where most of those issues aren't really huge concerns anymore. To make a long story short, if you're after a premium leather feel for $265, there are quite a few actual leather football boots that cost significantly less that are going to give you a much more premium leather feel than these two. These are certainly leather-like, but definitely trend more so in the direction of a speed boot than it does kind of a heritage soft leather option, where, like I've compared in the past, I actually think the Tiempo Legend 10 Elite, this special edition pair included, probably compares most closely to something along the lines of the messy variant of the Adidas F50 Elite, which is a football boot that is very appropriately only $5 more expensive than these. And in all honesty, given the choice between the two, while I do really like the way that this boot fits and feels, I'd probably pick the F50s over these. Beyond all that, pretty much everything else about this boot is the same as a normal Legend 10 Elite. You have a deep central lacing system with the tongue area being filled in with an elasticated fly knit material. This allows for great overall adjustability and generally just nice containment. The lockdown, like I said, is very good for a pair of Tiempos, but that should be expected given the more structured synthetic material that this has versus all the kangaroo leather ones that we've had in the past. Low-cut design, which again is very consistent with what we've always seen in the Tiempo series. You have an internal plastic heel counter, you have a very Mercurial-esque heel liner with a soft microfiber and a small amount of padding, but enough to still feel very comfortable. And then I'll give you guys a quick look at the insole, which is fully removable. You can see that it's a little bit more premium and that it has this really soft material on the surface for this made in Montebelluna variation, but other than that, it's just the same yellow foam material that you typically find, which is pretty decent, but certainly not a standout as far as football boot insoles go. And then moving to the base, once again, no changes from a regular Tiempo Legend here. The finish is crazy, but the materials used are exactly the same. It's a full plastic sole plate with these two small cutouts that you have in the forefoot, one a little bit further back than the other. You don't feel those whatsoever. They're apparently there for the sake of a little bit flex in pressure points underfoot to allow for better overall comfort. But for the most part, this just feels like a plastic sole plate all the way through. So nothing really notable about those particular features, more of a gimmick more than anything, I'd say. But the sole plate, it's on the thinner side, it's relatively flexible, and just kind of slims down that classic Tiempo profile that we've been getting for so many years, with the FG stud pattern, again, being pretty classic Tiempo, blades under the heel, conical studs in the forefoot, some toe pick blades at the tip of the toe, and overall, really solid, well-balanced traction if you want something that kind of combines the best of both worlds in terms of modern blades and classic conical studs. And then there's the weight, where, like I've mentioned, the Tiempo series has strayed further into the speed boot category in terms of feel than it ever has before, and that is very much reflected in the weight of the boots as well. I thought it'd be fun to take a look at the weight of the regular Legend 10 next to this Made in Italy variation using a scale in real time, both in the same size 9.5 US. We'll start off with the standard Tiempos, and you can see that they weigh in at 7.2 ounces, the equivalent of 204 grams, which is in the same weight range as a lot of top-end speed boots. And then we'll throw on the Made in Italy variation, which you can see weighs in at 6.75 ounces, the equivalent of 191 grams. Meaning that for whatever reason, this special edition variant shaves just over 10 grams of weight, which is not a ton in the grand scheme of things, but it's also not insignificant when you're talking about a pair of football boots that are already pretty light, basically putting this in the same weight range as some of the lightest football boots currently on the market, which is probably not what you would expect from something bearing the Tiempo Legend name. On feet, despite the very different look compared to the standard Legend 10, there's only one real difference that you can actually feel, and I'd argue it's a pretty big one. That has to do with the shaping of the football boot, where from a width perspective, it's very similar through the heel and midfoot area, but they seem to have added a little bit of extra width and volume through the forefoot and toe box area on this Made in Italy variation that I personally think is significantly more comfortable and just feels so much better. Of course, that's something that is going to vary a lot from person to person, or if you did have narrower feet or just like that kind of more tapered, pinched in shape in the toe box and forefoot area of the standard Legend 10, you might not like this change as much, but certainly when you're talking about a leather pair of football boots, which is what the Tiempo Legend series has been for such a long time, I think people anticipate a little bit more of a forgiving fit, and this has more of that than the standard Legend 10 does, which almost seems to trend again in the direction of speed boots from a fit and shaping perspective. Having said that, this is still a very snug, relatively tight-fitting pair of football boots, and if you're comparing them to almost anything with a natural leather upper, these just don't have that soft, leather-like level of comfort that I think a lot of people might anticipate, especially with the way that this particular pair looks. But that's also not to say that these are uncomfortable in any way at all. For what they are, they fit and feel really nice on feet, so no major complaints from me there. And again, the fact that they fit and feel better than the normal Legend 10 is only a good thing. Speaking of width, it's still a relatively snug, low volume fitting pair of football boots, so if you do have really wide feet, you probably aren't going to find these the most comfortable. So for wide footers, probably not a great option. Same goes for other versions of the Tiempo Legend 10. And then as far as sizing is concerned, I'm wearing these in my usual size 9.5 US, and the fit and the length is perfect. So if you are looking to get a pair for yourself, like the normal Tiempos, I would strongly recommend going true to size in order to achieve the best possible fit. So in conclusion, I do think that this is the best variation of the Tiempo Legend 10 Elite that we've had so far, and certainly if you're after a very basic synthetic leather football boot, this would definitely be one of your very best options. Having said that, I think the issue that Nike is having with the full synthetic Tiempo, and I definitely see this myself having tried just about everything, is that there just isn't enough about these boots that make them stand out compared to other models that cost the same amount of money, perhaps a little bit more, or even significantly less. Where I've used this example a couple times already, but $265 for these versus $270 for the messy F50 Elite, I'm picking those F50s every single time. I just think they feel that much better. And then if you want to compare them to something significantly less expensive, I've also used this example quite a few times recently, the Puma King Pro that retails for $120 and can regularly be found on sale for under $100 is a great example of a synthetic leather football boot that, at least from a touch, fit, and feel perspective, I really don't think is too far off of these. And then obviously if you want something with a natural leather upper, these are just not going to be on your radar at all. You can spend a little bit more and you can spend significantly less and just end up with something that offers a level of comfort and a touch on the ball that I would argue is so much more special than what these have on offer. Where at the end of the day, I do think these are really good football boots. The issue is they don't really do anything better than most of the other alternatives. I hate to say it, but the Nike Tiempo series has lost its identity.